Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have two terrific poets with us today, Carine Topal and Patty Seyburn. Carine will read first and then Patty. I quote, Carine Topal, born and raised in New York City, holds a MA from New York University. Over the years, Carine has anthologized the poetry of many special needs children. She participated in the grassroots organization, California Poets in the Schools, was the poet in residence for the city of Manhattan Beach, and poet in education for Manhattan Beach elementary schools. She has, in her short lifetime, published 6 collections of poetry, most recently, Dear Blood, fresh off the press from Ben Yehuda Teaching. Ben Yehuda, teaching, playing music, and writing poetry have saved her and continue to be a source of great joy. She's grateful to have what she has and is eager to share. Here's a wonderful poet, Carine Topal.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you. Thank you, Harry, for sticking around and staying with us with poetry and carrying on. It's been a great source of inspiration for the community. I also want to thank Patty Seyburn for the beautiful blurb that she gave for my book, Dear Blood, as well as Moira Simon and Yehoshua November. That really was wonderful to get such great support. I'd also like to thank Ben Yehuda Press and Julia Nalbach for helping bring this book into the world. I'd like to, before I start reading, dedicate my portion of the reading to Jan Wesley, who died March 1st, just 3 days ago, and who was a joy and a love for so many people in the Los Angeles community. She'll be greatly missed. We had a last reading at Beyond Baroque, February 6th, just almost a month ago. And unfortunately, she quickly declined and has passed, but still with us in spirit. So this is for her. This is for you, Jan. Ancient Fall. In the beginning, hectares of weedy field between thick woods. The forests, the falls by a long lake, stain blue. What did I know of the menace and flaw that would sweep through this earliest garden? How could I have shouldered up to the bark of a tree, taken fruit from a limb I could not reach on my own? Day was breaking, the world was hungry, and I knew that I'd be doubted, unforgiven, taking from the tree that shaped desire, the tree that put an end to my wanting. This next piece is something I wrote a few years ago. They filled with promise and worth, and the epigraph is from Hilda Doolittle, HD. Invisible, indivisible spirit, how is it you come so near? Maker of the tender lamb, of the nuns you marry in the courthouse of heaven, your young brides sing your song of our nation in the halls of justice. Author of Schubert and the deep song of Gongora, creator of Ruth and the widows, hear us. Architect of landscapes, how do you sleep in skies swollen with our desperate faith? Are you not our Father, engineer of the windswept and the wilderness? Lord of the tall men in winter coats, setting fires, starting ovens, a record written on their bodies? Of the gathering migrants who lean into these fields where the swaddled, small as husks of corn, burn. Consider the things which dim and die in your grace. gravity fleshing out those who linger too long in the dark garden of mausoleums? What of the men and the boys who scale walls and jump from when the fog lifts? Carry them back, the jittery, the faint, the fray-hemmed and flat-eyed. Lift them from hunger, those who desire kingdom come, those who gather their skirts to cross the river, who forgive, give birth while rising waters warn them, a sharp rock in their hands, dogs barking in the birdless, blood-red sky. For almost any animal, dead-ended at the sea or walled off at a crossing between lands, bleeds out. Their dark poured into the very light you made. This next poem is for my father, who taught me how to play music, to listen to music, to make it an inspirational joy in my life. Threadbare, we are homesick. After the war, the world is small again. Enough has survived to start a country. For miles, as far as the eyes take you, towns hardly alive tilt on the sand. Stop trains wait for something to move them. The air is thick with worry. I search for a quartet in the town of my people, but find no one except for a desperate boy pointing to my cello, which I hold on to, belly down. It is my father as a boy. Who knows how, in the half-lit morning hours, people see what they long for. In this shadow world, there is no father, just the slight weight of his memory, the almost human moan of my cello, the ghostly groan seeking 4 chairs for a chamber, a night song to hold me alone in this new republic. I am homesick, although I do not know where home is. But a faraway music holds my attention. The adagio I played years ago while father sat for hours in his chair and hummed. An impressive audience, enough to fill the town, sits atop the moving trains, fanning themselves with their top hats and berets. On cue, we open with an effortless adagio for strings, whose middle passage initiates a slight dynamic change to andante. Now listeners hold their hats. Hours pass, but they don't stir until dusk, with the roused allegretto, when they grow animated as though something suddenly wound up, throwing carnations, shouting bravos. My father sits beside me playing his violin. We play on, losing ourselves in the earth's decor, our swaying bodies polished in the next sun, our tears pooling at the small scratch of our wood. Penniless, not broken, we move from town to town, appearing suddenly out of the dust. The same trains stand on their tracks. The same people wait as if to preserve the heartbeat. Ah, Mozart, man of loose buttons, the flustered nerve of the world, taking up most of the sky. Con affetto. This next piece is for my mother, who came in very late in 1939 from Dresden, Germany, and sailed across the Atlantic on the USS Washington. This is called Mother of Rough Tongue. Mother of fibers and long feet, of high brow and piano, of forte and lento and cabbage stuffed and plumped, who once, rising from the grave, took to throwing stones. Mother of mine, whose mothering thread was bone on bone. O cross-bound, high-heeled, pearled at the opera, O mother of grimace and charm sailing across the sea, who stood knock-kneed, hate-whipped on the starboard side. It was 1939, your family renegades from the Third Reich, your mother, mouth of brine, dodging you on deck, your doubts and dreads, the unshakable Atlantic backing you up, taking you home. O mother of pedaled machines, of pleats and Schurz and Schubert, of thin-ribboned breath, of fretting and frenzy, your husband, also your cousin, hidden in linens and chintz. Mother who buried your first and second boys, of dashing out, disappearing in the high grass and blackberry shrubs. You with your quiver and panic and broken glass, shocked by nothing. You were lovely even then, Mother. This book is dedicated to my parents and to my granddaughters, Shoshana and Daria. And here is a poem from my father, who was not a religious man, who was an atheist, but culturally Jewish and really enjoyed the cantorial songs. And the poem will explain the rest. My father, who refused to sit Shiva. We misunderstood our luck, growing up in that house, third from the corner, where the forsythia bloomed, as though to mock us, and my brothers hurried down the street with a handful of bees in a jar for father, who had 1,000 demands, who did not easily love, but was loved, who put the boys in their place with his razor tongue, afraid to let go of them, yet keeping a distance, who lacked the know-how to father, who struggled, feeling diminished in their world as they grew, who held in his pocket the several sorrows of the world when the boys got older and first one, then the other died. My father, who refused to hold Shiva, though he sat fixed for a week beneath the shrouded mirror. Friends came anyway, pressing against us like broken stalks under an impossible weight. Some hugging casseroles, or others with bouquets surrendering the bare-throated flowers, a continuous loop of murmured comforts feeding the machine of our grief. So many things disappear in the world. Lilacs, even the bending light leaves, though the windows linger. Unaccounted for, the long numbered streets, a river that once flanked our city. And father, overwhelmed and unmovable, withdrew, watched as those who could leave left the wreckage of our home. This next piece is called Chagall Sam, as in Marc Chagall. For it was moonlight in your town of old Jews, the quiet lunatic who, seeking paradise, drowned in the river of his last winter. It was the tremors of childhood through which you barely slept, a bed by a window looking out to the near end of Yiddish, ash spewing from chimneys, the heat before the fire. It was Shema for your mother who carried the fever of a great loss, a sister hastily named Miriam, her heart chambers closed in the bright sleeves of snow. Moissy, think of the rows of amber-roofed homes pitched toward the banks of your frozen river, the Viridian run of the Lucchese, the fires just before you ran. I'm going to be reading two more poems. The next one is also Russian inspired. I've been there a few times. My father's side of the family is Russian, and my parents are cousins, actually. So I always tell people explains an awful lot about myself. But this piece is about Anna Akhmatova and the Fontanka, which is the home where she lived. It used to belong. It's an historic building that used to belong to the noblemen. And after the revolution, it belonged to the peasants. And that's where Akhmatova lived for a while with servants and some very poor people. Fortunately, I was there during the White Nights. And so this is called Belle Noche, which is White Nights. Streets glazed with brine, the reek of a dead wren, and cabbage. Midnight pearls down the narrow channels of Leningrad. It is August. Moonless white nights skulk along the walk to December Street. Further down, the boulevard and the bread stand. Our bodies are fugitive regrets. True morning will come with its rusted sun scuffing the hide of our tongues. Next year, at this time, no sirniki drenched in honey, no candlelight or caviar, not an apricot. Akhmatova poses against a metal grate, a bandana around her neck of her quarried words. At her feet, a bounty of stolen apples for the people. At what cost this ripening thievery, feeding us in the wings of a half-empty palace? The light from our mouths she was, and was vapor that unleashed misfortune, occupying every room. And the last poem is called My Dead, and I read it forwards and backwards, so they actually become two different poems. My dead. My dead are always behind me, lingering in the slow hereafter. My dead who forget how to wonder, who put me in charge of the joy. I, who was once so young. My dead, my disfigured, my bound, my beloveds, lingering in the slow hereafter. In the slow hereafter, lingering and bound, my beloveds, my dead, my disfigured. I, who was once so young. Who put me in charge of the joy? My dead, who forget how to wonder, lingering in the slow hereafter. Behind me, my dead are always. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carine. Your poetry is always so tender and sacred. You have so much love for your father, mother, ancestry, and it's really touching. And you give credence to respect and for divinity and for life. You keep life alive in the tradition of your family, and also here and now. And I love that last poem, forwards and backwards. Where do you place yourself? I know you mentioned one of the great Russian poets, and also in that period of time, Mandelstam and Marina Tsveteva and Pasternak were the four lyric poets along with her. Where do you place yourself in the tradition of poetry?
Well, I have to say that it's a very interesting mix of the Russian and Spanish writers. Of course, Lorca, who was a big influence on me and really taught me the art of leaping. So beside the Russian poets, I would have to say it's such an eclectic choice. I loved Stephen Dunn and Gerald Stern, who taught me to keep, my language at bay. Oftentimes, I used to get carried away with the Dylan Thomas in me and go off. But I'd have to say Stephen Dunn, Gerald Stern. I'm going to forget so many people. I'm looking at my book. I love Jack Gilbert. Jack Gilbert, probably one of the greats for me. So there is a mixture, but I think I had a previous life somewhere in Spain because the Spanish poets are really significant in my life. So it's an interesting mix.
Being a poet, it's not an everyday thing for most people. What do you do in a day? Could you just tell us what you do in terms of your writing, and when do you write? How long do you write? Your reading?
I used to write first thing in the morning. Now I write, well, I have to say, I write in the evenings when I'm really tired because I find that I'm not as judgmental and I can filter out the garbage of the day. It's like just be like half dreaming when I'm really exhausted. So I don't have that critical adult on my shoulder. I do yoga. I play tennis. I play the piano. I'm really busy if I'm not writing, I try to make an effort to play the piano. If I'm not playing the piano, I make an effort to make sure I get my writing in. Even it's just my journaling. And I have a fabulous desk in my office. And my husband built me a beautiful picture of Frida Kahlo that's framed outside. So I have that for inspiration. I'm very lucky. I think I have a rich life. But my writing is not as, I'm not as, routined as it used to be. So I find that I can write in the evening, and if I have to write in the morning, because it's been a day or two, I do that. So I don't keep a very tight schedule, when it comes to that.
Now, since we are coming from the motion picture home, could you tell us maybe a few or all of your top 10 movies of all time?
Okay. Gosh. If I could remember. Okay. I'd have to say that Wings of Desire is up there as one of my top. This is really tough. Ida, the Polish film Ida, which one of my favorite. I think Strawberry Wine, which is a Polish film, another Polish film. Oh gosh, I'm going to forget so many. Left Luggage, one of my top films. I'm going to remember all these films when it's Patty's turn to read. That's for sure. Give me some films. I mean, Raging Bull. I don't know. I love films and I've seen so many. Enchanted April. Gosh. I just saw Nora, which I loved. I'm trying to, that's about all I can come up with. I didn't know the question was coming or else I would have been prepared. Sorry.
You mentioned Nora, and as you know, it won the best picture, and the guy, the director.
Sean Baker, yeah.
He won, the top 4 awards.
Yeah.
The only other one who ever won 4 awards was Disney. But why do you think Nora won Best Picture?
I was very surprised. I was surprised that she won the Best Actress. I think, independent films are so extraordinarily important. $6 million as opposed to 30 million. I think maybe the Academy, who was ever voting, felt that we're losing theaters, we're losing film to television, people are staying home. I think it had a warmth about it that was undeniable. It was unpretentious. The ending was so unexpected and touching. The cast of Russians were free to act. I love the freedom that they all had. It was though it was all, impromptu. So I could say it was just a great day for the Academy that they chose this film. I'm not sure why they did. The acting was marvelous, and it was a very human story. Sex trafficking and what one has to do to make a living.
I agree with what you said. And also, I've been a member of the Academy since 1976. And as you know, in the last few years, they've added a lot of younger people, multi-ethnic, multiracial, multicultural. And so I think, probably when I was going there all the time, it was about 6,300. Now it's over 10,000. Wow. So I think that demographic also, and I also think Sean Baker, his first picture, Tangerine, he made on a phone for 10 grand about, drag queens, trends, people there at that donut shop on Highland and Santa Monica. And then the Florida project about, a woman who's struggling to keep her kids with her. And then this one. And so there are subject matters that, our society doesn't really look at. The last
marginalized, yes.
Fairy tale. But I also think it has to do with his exhilarating filmmaking. But thank you for all of your choices. And just to get back to your poetry, I know I'm being redundant, but one thing among many others that I always love about your poetry, Carine, is the tenderness and the sacredness of your poetry and how you keep your ancestry alive. And you face what has happened, the horrors that have happened, and also you exalt life. And so I'm always so gracious when you come on the show or when I see you, because you have that such a great heart, and you're so empathetic and compassionate, as well as obviously well learned. So thank you once again.
Thank you, Harry.
Carine Topal. It's always an honor and a pleasure when you come on the show.
Thank you so much, Harry. I so appreciate it.
Our next poet is Patty Seyburn. Patty Seyburn has published 5 collections of poems: Threshold Delivery, Finishing Line Press, 2019, Perfecto, What Books Press, Glass Table Collective, 2014, Hilarity, which won the Green Rose Prize given by New Issues Press, Western Michigan University, 2009, Mechanical Cluster, Ohio State University Press, 2002, and Disaparodic, Helicon 9 editions, 1980, I guess is what it is. I'm not sure. I can't read that. Which won the 1998, which won the 1997 Marianne Moore Poetry Prize and the American Library Association's Notable Book Award for 2000. Her 6th book of poems, Jukebox, is forthcoming in fall 2025 from What Books Press, Glass Table Collective in Los Angeles. Seyburn grew up in Detroit. She is a professor of California State University, Long Beach, and was a Fulbright scholar at Alexandra Icon Cuza University in Iasi, Romania in fall 2024. Forgive my pronunciation. Here's a superlative poet, Patty Seyburn.
Hi, everyone. Carine, it was a pleasure to listen to you. That last poem is so beautiful. I can know my grad students, that is a prompt. I can see it down the pike, writing back, so thank you. That was really, really inspiring and gorgeous. It's one of those things that you think, can it be done? And then you did it, so thank you.
Thank you, Patty.
So I'm going to read all poems from Jukebox that is coming out this fall. First poem is called Some Days It's Hard to Find a Purpose. I chased a flocculent sky into a chain link fence and exchanged a few sentences with an unexpected friend. Our winter winds have abated, and I can tell the world awaits my position on gratitude. It's a nice theory, but I am a pragmatist, a lousy liar, often distressed by the edges of day when I expect too much or am discontent with the little progress made. Maybe 30 birds on a wire, 3 wires, 3 birds on the lowest, silhouettes. Are they mindful or lonely? I like to trap myself in cul-de-sacs where I rarely belong to witness the clouds' dispersion. Firmamental auction, opaque, pointillist, gone. Crowds are often told to disperse. There is danger in numbers, in wholeness, in beauty. The world to come is a place where they exist. And we may want that, but must be content with this. Fractured Hero's Journey. We went on a 12-sparrow walk so I could teach my soul to speak. Jim Harrison said, "This is the language of poetry." Few things scare me as much as the word soul. We climbed No Name Trail until the coastal ridge in some silence to give our hearts their full retinue, and because we have run out of things to say. I do not look back like my favorites from ancient tales. We climb down before we climb up. Whether you prefer to begin with heel or speed says as much about you as the test that showed I perceived and judged in equal measure. Measured, and found wanting. No balladeer will record these sagas lined in artichoke thistle and prickly pear cactus, a little poison oak, and we don't lie to the tourists who ask, "Almost there?" They may be confused angels. We point them toward horizon, which shares nearly everything with orison, an ancient word for prayer I find hard to, and therefore do not pronounce. The poems in Jukebox, there's the long first section, all contain references to music. And then there's a second section that has birds, because birds sing. And then there's a third section, very short section, that is just, that addresses silence. So that's the trajectory of the book. The longest section is the first. And as I said, everything in there has some musical reference. I grew up in Detroit, grew up listening to the radio and playing piano. And then I was a jazz DJ when I was in college. So I feel like music has always been part of my life. So that's kind of what you're going to hear for the rest of these poems. Just some references to music mostly. This is called Games That Help Me Sleep. I almost made laudanum on Words with Friends and found retina on Ruzzle. So I've decided to take a cheat day from my diet of doubt, my stringent regimen of dwelling on trouble, my abiding attraction for anxiety. I will say, I am not lonely. We are a robust group with a detailed charter, strategic plan, and many vice presidents. But I need a new crowd. Hope poured me 3 fingers of Irish whiskey, which does not make me regret like scotch. And I'm going to drink it down at that bar at the tip of the peninsula where aging surfers talk about the wave that got away. Is it depth that makes the Pacific Pacific? On nights where it gets prematurely dark, I go in search of my lost intention, try to make your ears hear what your mouth utters. On the jukebox, someone punches Dick Dale. Last call. Just give me something salvific so I can stop redecorating the clubhouse. This poem is about sitting in the back seat of your parents' car, wanting to listen to the radio, but not wanting them to listen to the radio. So you have to figure out how to make that happen, which is impossible. But so this is called Tonight's the Night, Gonna Be All Right. In the Ford LTD's banquette back seat, I listened to contraband lyrics they could not have understood. I think. Just in case, I talked, expounded, informed, declared, to block out Rod Stewart's metaphor for sex. A bird, a dove, something avian, something winged, not unlike Marvel's Time's winged chariot, as in, what are you waiting for? If they found out, the radio station WDRQ might be turned off, but they never found out, and I never heard the whole song, only the opening chords before I would speak out to protect the free speech rights of poor Rod Stewart, who had none in my parents' car, not one, and he could not have known, and it's perfectly possible no one knew or cared except for me, layering my voice over his raspy plea, my parents desperate to hear me tell them about my life, as I am to hear about my children's lives, willing to turn the radio up, down, or sideways for a small confidence, revealing some fraction of myself, of their selves, however fragmented. We do not even know what selves are until we have no access to them. Well, I just wanted Rod Stewart to sing freely what it was all like, even if it meant I could not listen. This is called Ship of Theseus. Whether the ship is still the original ship, if most or all of its parts have been replaced, seems to have no human application. So I'm struggling to care about this bark, this thought experiment that so entranced Heraclitus and Plato and Plutarch. I do not travel with a terribly philosophical crowd, have whittled my circle down to 4 friends, none of whom own small boats. We do not talk about odd, abstract notions, but twice of late, someone has mentioned the strange ship, so I must ponder, like the famed Greeks, the issue of when something is no longer its authentic self. I have not been myself for quite some time. This mood and mole I do not recognize, this constellation of spots across my knuckles, all these nautical cap sleeve shirts, who bought them? I'm not immune to looking deeply, to leaning over the edge of a well. I see Cubist Ozymandias and boulders, Greta Garbo and ice flows. I can make a connection between euphoria and euphony beyond the obvious root, the ancient Greek for well, though the latter traveled through France and the former implied a state of joy, drug-induced. Not sure I have the lungs to chase down this poem, this thought experiment. I am a practical girl from a practical town who likes pretty music with a dollop of Stravinsky thrown in. I trained myself to like John Coltrane, and now the riffs are all I know that make sense of this, and I'll buy you a beer. Riddle me this. I will not wait in the egg line today. It winds around the kefir and hummus stand, past the fishmonger who sells me white sea bass and trout. There's heirloom cauliflower and Napa cabbage, blood oranges to sample, and mushrooms from outer space, sold by a lovely couple who really know their fungi. But I will not wait in the egg line today. 3 sides of a giant square, it's Beach Boys T-bird weather, and I forgot my new bucket hat, but my sunglasses are fake Chanel, and I look hot in and through them. There's a guitar player, and I ask for In the Beginning by Emerson, Lake, and Palmer, and give him a pluote, and he laughs and plays the introduction before veering into Blackboard, which I also would have bartered for, but I will not wait in the egg line today, though they have quail and duck eggs too. And the insides of the brown are wonderfully, weirdly orange, sunset orange. Oh, this gorgeous world. The sky is scramble and fry, and nobody dances sober, said my buddy Cicero, my favorite Roman skeptic. Ode to simultaneity. Scott Joplin died in a mental institution the year my father was born in Toronto. The final card in his parents' hand, almost enough for a game of gin. King of ragtime, Joplin suffered a breakdown when his opus work, Tremonisha, met with no success. Another genius depressive, Rachmaninoff, felt stifled by being asked to play Prelude in C-sharp minor at every concert. He died in Los Angeles after a period of relative unproductivity and Slavic melancholy, a description of tone, not a diagnosis. The year my parents married in the rabbi's study in Detroit before they boarded trains to Edmonton, Alberta, where my father served in the war flying cargo planes to Alaska. Abraham Maslow, famed psychologist known best for his hierarchy of needs, developed the concept of self-actualization, leading to that of cognitive dissonance and the study of motivation. What makes one proceed in the face of suffering, misery? Compared with these men, my parents lived small lives that wove through great moments of inspiration and creation, but here I am, suturing them all together with the sturdy twine of the 21st century. How time unifies the disparate, how time loves us, and love, as Thackeray said, makes fools of us all. I'm going to read 2 more poems as well. I think one of my students is from a town mentioned in this poem. So, I think, or has touched down there. That's my understanding. I could be wrong. So this is called Baby, It's Cold Outside. Every morning I check in with Hump Tulips, not that town, with Hump Tulips, a town of 216 in the great state of Washington, and review the state of the snow on the Snoqualmie Pass, where chains are required except on all-wheel drive. My favorite weather girl is Brittany Boyer, who is wearing a nice red turtleneck and currently focusing on the Southeast, storms, with sunglasses in Jacksonville. How much we can know now. Is it any wonder there is no room for Proust in my brain? Avalanche warning around Mount Hood with an unstable snowcap. Santa Ana winds on our frontier here in SoCal stock up on tissue. Myself, I rely on Dolbear's law, which equates a rise in temperature with an increase in a cricket's chirps. Count the number of chirps in 15 seconds, add 37, and there's the temperature in Fahrenheit, named for Dutchman Daniel Gabriel Fahrenheit in 1724. He also determined the body's temperature to be roughly 96 degrees. God, I love information. Thank you for information, the information age. Imagine me centuries ago mumbling, "Make me, O Lord, thy spinning wheel complete," then getting whacked about the head for daydreaming during the tasks appointed me. perhaps having a prescient Peggy Lee moment. Is that all there is? While my mother, 17th century Shirley, wise beyond her century, listened to the crickets and threw more wood on the fire. Snoqualmie?
Yeah.
All right, close. The final poem is the last poem in this book. Yeah, and it's just a little lyric, and we've hit the silence part we've hit the silence portion. This is called Curtain. There is no such thing as dream. Only that life where the phrase make sense has no meaning. As they say there, if sense exists, it need not be made. There are no modifiers there, no wild night, no statement necklace, no deep sadness. Each word a pillar. Each word stands on its own, alone and true. They are lonely and strong, sometimes silent, that type. No one owns them. Last night I went there thoroughly and was surprised at the story sutured of person and event and place and death. You were there too, playing a bit hard. Thank you. Thank you, Harry. Mhm.
Thank you, Patty, for such a wonderful, erudite, steady journey. Your, as you said, themes, happiness and also hope. And I love the poems about music, Rod Stewart, Coltrane, Rachmaninoff, and Scott Joplin. And also you're talking about Maslow, the existential psychologist, and growing up in Detroit. And you just are such a sharp observer, and you have such a great ear, and you're a witness, and it's confident, the superlative use of language that you have. And I have a couple of questions for you. When did you write your first poem?
I wrote my first poem when I was 8 years old. I was in third grade. I had a teacher named Mr. Zerkich, George Zerkich. And I I lived in Detroit. I went to a weirdo private school. Mr. Zerkich was there for 1 year, and I went through 5 math books and wrote 63 poems. So that's what I did in all of third grade. And all the parents were in an uproar because, like, what were we learning? What was happening? And, and then but I did fine. And my parents, who did not go to college, but were very smart people, they knew a good thing when they saw it. And they said, you know what, 5 math books and 63 poems, that sounds like a good year. Sounds like a good year. So back then, you know how people like to say, oh, I wish I had those poems. I'm so grateful to not have those those poems. I can only imagine how terrible they were. But
child prodigy.
Oh, that's kind of you. Right.
What is it that attracts you to the poetry form?
I was saying to my students this morning that one of the reasons I love poetry more than writing prose is that I think poets are control freaks. We tell people when to breathe and how long to breathe. We don't, our content is not just content. We really control the body as well as the mind. And so I think we're I think we're little lowercase gods, or we have the little lowercase god complex. And I love that. I just, writing poetry, I think Carine touches on this, much in her work, is that the mystery of it is so intriguing to me. I still don't know. I've written a lot of poems. I still don't quite know how it works. And I'm saying this with my grad students sitting in front of me. So that's reassuring, I'm sure, but I love that mystery. So, yeah.
When you sit down to write a poem, what is it that kicks off the poem? Is it an image, an emotion, something you see, words come to you? What is it?
My strategy is usually sort of akin to collecting lint in my pocket. There's sort of an accrual of an image, a phrase, a piece of language, something overheard, something dreamt. And it all starts sort of just kind of glomming onto each other. And then at some point you kind of look at that lint ball and say like, oh, there's some interesting things that seem to be in conversation with each other. And I'm going to trust that they found each other for a reason. And so I think a lot of it is about sort of trusting the material that finds you, and trusting that when you find material that it's because it has something to teach you. Trusting that when you remember or recognize something as interesting, it's because you aren't done with it and it's not done with you either. So I am really a very practical person. I always say I'm a very high functioning poet, but I'm really very like woo woo when it comes to writing poetry. Like I think that process for me involves a lot of trust, but also being open and recognizing, and having to sort of, put everything on hold. Stop. I got to write that down, which too often happens when I'm driving. So don't drive near me is my advice, my survival advice. I grew up in Detroit. I can really drive with one hand, but it's not a great idea.
You take the time and you're receptive and you listen to the external and the internal world. Being a teacher, what would you say to a young woman who's sitting down to write her first poem? What would you tell her to focus on?
Well, that's a tough question. I would say, it probably has to do with sort of trusting that what you remember, that what you're drawn to writing about, that has some resonance for you, and to sort of try to be open and not self-censor yourself. I'd not judge, not self-censor. That can come later. There's a book by Ben Shahn called The Shape of Content, where he sort of talks about that, the kind of editor, the writer, and the editor. And I think we start editing too early. I think we've got to be generative and generous to ourselves. So I think I would say to that young woman, be generative, be generous, be brave, be brave.
I like that. And we have a couple minutes left. So why don't you, since you've been on, Patty, say a few words about Carine's poetry, and then Carine can say a few words about the poetry that she heard today. Patty?
Well, I really love Carine's work, and I speak her Eastern European background speaks to me as well. My my father's from Romania, and that's where I spent last fall. So I find her, her musical background, in a way, maybe we're a good pair to read together. Her musical background is really speaks to me, and the kind of the lyric poignant quality of her work, I think, is just lovely. So, I was so happy to blurb her book. You don't say yes to everybody. Yes to the work. You say yes to the work you can back up, and you can say, yeah, this is beautiful work that has something to teach me.
Carine?
Yeah, thank you, Patty. Patty and I have known of one another for a very long time, but only recently have introduced ourselves again. And one of the things that I really like listening today is the intelligence of Patty's work. And then all of a sudden, it's the daily life, the surfers, the listening to the music on the radio. I love that piece. I really related to that. You're sitting in the back and you're thinking about your world, and you want to become part of your parents. You want to know more about them. And then it's about you and how music is connective tissue. And I didn't know that about Patty's work. So that was really wonderful. I think the takeaway for me was, I love how smart her work is alongside references to everyday living. And I think that's a great gift to have, because ordinarily we hear narrative work and it's about one thing, or it's intelligent work that you have to work at understanding the poetry of. But I think for Patty, she weaves it so well. And yeah, it's just they complement one another. So that was very enjoyable.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Patty.
No, I'm just feeling, like this is a nice day.
I agree with
Yay today. All right.
I agree with both of you, what you said about each other's. And it's nice, as Carine said about Patty's work, to live in the here and now. And, like what was it Keith said, I see and I sing what I saw. And you both do that, among other things. Next Tuesday, we have two wonderful poets with us, Marianne McFadden and May Berson-Brugia. And so that will be a lovely scene. And so it's time for us to move on to the next show, which is Cinephiles here. So Jennifer Clymer, our wonderful director, is here to take us home once again. And thank you once again.
Thank you.
Patty Seyburn and Carine
everybody.
Topal.
Thank you, Patty.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer and Harry. Thank you, Patty.